to everyone here in this live Zoom and on Facebook. Welcome to today's ELGL webinar presented in partnership with the Davenport Institute at Pepperdine University. Today, we're talking about work from home, team building, and different strategies that assist with working from home. I am the Assistant Director of the Davenport Institute for Public Engagement and Civic Leadership. My name is Pooja Giovanna, and it is my pleasure to moderate today's presentation. ELGL is the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. They are committed to engaging the brightest mind in local government. One of the ways they do this is by providing exceptional and free online training about local government. The Davenport Institute's mission is to help build stronger communities by promoting public participation in local government. Needless to say, Davenport and ELGL pair well together. Looking back in the last year, it has been a mighty year, and we're pleased to welcome you back to ELGL Zoom, following up from our series last spring. Today's event will explore work from home team building strategies that have successfully engaged communities through the COVID-19 pandemic. Our guests will talk about their experiences as leaders ensuring team building with their team as the team was geographically elsewhere. Team building is an essential component for project and department success, and we welcome you to this conversation. A few housekeeping logistics. We're saving a recording of today's webinar in the ELGL webinar library located on elgl.org. We'll drop a link into that later in the chat. So if you want to forward it to the rest of your team, you're more than welcome to. I invite you to be interactive in this webinar. We have a lot of opportunities to comment, to share in. If something comes into your mind, a question, please just drop it in as it's going, and we will keep an eye on the chat. Your microphones and conference phones are muted as you come in, but that's only for the sake of eliminating background noise. Please feel free to unmute during question and answer, which will happen at the end. We'll have about 10-15 minutes. I believe that is all the boring housekeeping stuff I have to go through. So now I get to do the fun part of moderating this conversation. Welcome, everybody. I would like to ask our panelists to unmute themselves and introduce themselves. So Melissa Weiss, would you like to go first?
Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Weiss, and I am the Director of Administrative Services at the City of Wauwatosa, which is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Thank you. Deborah?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Lonon. Last time that I was on here, I was with the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County, but I've since shifted and I'm now the Commissioner for Grants and Community Development with the City of Atlanta.
Josh Edwards, Athens-Clarke County Assistant Manager. And Deborah, we miss you, but thankfully I just got to have lunch with you and you're still local. So, you know, we miss you at work, but not at home. Glad to be back and talking with everybody. I would say that we've learned a lot, but we realize we probably need to have a long ways to go in terms of working from home. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Thank you so much. Well, let's kick off. Josh, that was great lead-in. So it's as if you had my script. For many organizations, the pandemic was their first experience with remote work. I can say that for the Davenport Institute, it was our first experience. Can you share a little bit about if this was the case for your city or was working from home already offered? So how new was this whole remote work concept for you and your team?
I think some people had been doing it, so but it was very new. It was not something that everybody had experience in. We did not have an organizational policy. We didn't have understanding of what it looked like across the organization. We didn't have the technology to make it possible in place. And so I would say we weren't ready for it, but then we quickly put the pieces in place to make it happen as COVID came in. And I remember this webinar talking about, you know, rolling out Jabber and WebEx and doing that all the week before COVID got to Georgia. And so we saw it coming, but we weren't necessarily prepared and experts in working from home before it got here.
Thank you. I think the not being experts at working from home, probably a shared sentiment amongst our participants and live audience. Melissa, Deborah, any thoughts?
Very similar to Josh, we had occasional work from home for management level staff, so they would have had access to VPN and laptops and those things, but the bulk of our staff did not. And so we didn't have a policy. It was not the norm. It was more occasional, and rolling out that technology quickly was a challenge for the city. Also challenging was taking our meetings remote, and with remote access for public meetings, we had no remote access to public meetings before this, just streaming of the meetings on our website, and no technology really for customer service in a lot of ways remote. In fact, we, in the middle of the pandemic, rolled out our first wave of paying bills online, coincidentally. And so we were able to take some payments and customer service online, but those were very challenging aspects to the transition for the city of Wauwatosa.
Mhm.
So for the city of Atlanta, there was already, I guess, a foundation for some remote bill paying and access and even some meetings, but certainly not to the extent of what we shifted and transitioned to and what they shifted and transitioned to before I joined. I joined the city in November. So a good bit of the pandemic I experienced with Josh in Athens. But again, a lot of the experiences were the same. I would say specific for some departments, they were further ahead than others. The Department of Grants and Community Development had not been working remotely, and we worked very closely with the federal government, and there was just a lot of growing together. We're still growing together in many ways. So I don't think we've mastered it either.
I think that's a very good point, Deborah, if I may, that there is no mastering of this. It's in progress. It's always an adjustment as your team, whatever size that team may be, whether it's 3, whether it's a team of 4 or 10 or larger, there's always an adjustment curve. Looking at that, what were perhaps the most difficult aspects of staying remote? I remember when this all started, there was this abyss effect of we don't know how long, and maybe it's a couple of weeks. Should I take my monitor home? All these questions that we had. So could you please speak to, as leaders, the most difficult aspect of staying remote and the response from your team?
For this team, at least since I've joined, one of the ongoing difficulties is really gauging effectiveness, just to be really transparent with you. You know, you've got some people who just give it 110% every day, and then they usually need to be reeled into like, hey, take some time for yourself and for your family. But you also have people who need to be supervised a little more closely. And it's so sensitive a topic because you want to get productivity, you want to increase productivity, you want to maintain productivity, but you also want to value and kind of wage the pressures that are ongoing because of work, and then home pressures, because we're human beings outside of work first. And you add all of this, and it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to sort through. But for me, at least in this environment, one of the most difficult things I have to address is gauging productivity. We're getting ready to shift into coming back fully, and we have the option of remaining remote or doing a hybrid, but some people need to come back in. So that's a difficulty that I don't know how comfortable others are with acknowledging. I think we have a lot in common with our difficulties, but for me particularly, it's a lot of heavy work, it's nonstop, and I can't allow a portion or a fraction of the staff to carry the entire burden for the entire department.
If I may ask a follow-up, then are you approaching a hybrid model where some
Yes.
team members? Okay.
Yes, we're going to stagger. It's going to be hybrid in the most hybrid definition of hybrid. So we're just putting together a lot of things because I am very people oriented, and it's important that we keep in mind the people who are caring for children, the people who have adult dependents at home. There are so many things that people have shifted in their lives because of the pandemic that at the snap of a finger doesn't just go back and now you can go back to work. There's so much to contemplate and consider. So hybrid is the option, at least for my department.
Okay. Melissa, it looked like you were about to unmute, so I'm going to call on you next.
Sure. So I think for us, one of the most difficult aspects of remote work was connectivity and communication with employees. So we have 500 employees here at the city, and some of them were fully in person, as I'm sure everyone can appreciate, your fire, your police, our public works staff, and some were fully remote, and some of us were a balance of both. And so finding ways to shift our communication consistently and reach all of our employees with video messaging, information about the health nature of the pandemic, safety from the city administrator and human resources and IT, and all of that was a challenge for us, as well as just finding ways to connect with our employees in a way that met their needs. So in my department, we have some folks who lived alone at home and needed a little bit more one-on-one connection. Someone who had just gone back from maternity leave and was trying to balance an infant and no childcare and work, and some of us with children in school. And so how did we help them to feel connected to each other and the organization in a way that felt comfortable for them? And so we did quite a bit actually with staff meetings, wellness programming, information from dietitians on cooking and wellness and exercise and things you could do to reduce stress and navigate burnout, and programming that people could engage and connect with other employees on. And that was popular, but we would have liked to reach even more people with those aspects of our connectivity programming.
I was muted. You would think at this point we would all have this figured out. Melissa, if I may ask a follow-up, perhaps when you were reaching out and doing this engagement with certain team members, did you run into any challenges that Deborah shared in her answer, particularly that some team members being a bit more difficult to perhaps connect with and gauge productivity on, and this desire to potentially come back?
Yeah, I think that's part of management, and that is particularly challenging with remote workers, to stay connected and on top of what's going on with that work. I found that it was very challenging with our high-performing employees in particular to get them to kind of roll back and step away from the home office. For a portion, I support communications, and we have a staff of myself plus one that do that work. And so for a good portion of the last year, we worked 7 days a week, and that became quite exhausting. And so it was a bit of how to help people step back and how to find other people that had a little bit of capacity to step into that and help with some of that time and get them the skills and resources they needed to do that. And I think as managers in that hybrid environment, navigating that, it was a heavy lift. And that, I think, is what Deborah was saying, and it really is and continues to be. We need to stay engaged in that aspect of our work to support our employees so that our teams are well-rounded and working well together.
Thank you. Last but not least, Josh, you have the challenge. You have to share your answer and see if you match anything with Melissa and Deborah.
Yeah, I think, I would echo everything they said. I think what I would, as they took what my responses were going to be, I think our struggle has been interacting with the culture of the organization, which doesn't necessarily trust that people can do their work at home. And I think this isn't unique to local governments because we have so many frontline workers and whole departments that really aren't able to work from home. You often see this lack of trust between internal service departments and outward facing departments. And I think, the internal service departments were able to shift to working from home, and were able to engage in their work as a department and do a really good job. I think when some employees tried to engage with internal service departments, if they weren't able to get a hold of somebody who was working from home, they automatically went to, well, that person's not working, instead of trying to first seek to understand that, maybe they're helping somebody else. There's really no way to know because you can't go over to HR and knock on the door right now. And so I think our most difficult aspect is recognizing that departments are able to work from home, but because we weren't doing this beforehand, we haven't necessarily made the case to all employees that this is possible. and good for the organization, and you can still get the same level of service from those internal service departments if they're not there than if they are there. And so there wasn't that lived experience and proof that it could work. And so I think what we're finding as we bring employees back to the organization starting in June who have been working from home is, we're wanting to come back, but we're not wanting to lose focus on what we learned this past year and change. We're wanting to build an organizational policy with all of the departments so that everybody can look to it and say, okay, now I understand, conceivably if HR is working from home, this is under the context of what that might look like, and this is what I can expect. And so we just had no expectations. We found people going to a certain direction instead of trusting that there was really good work being done. And I think we've seen high quality work get pumped out, and we've seen employees step up who are working from home and prove that it's a great model and something we should widely adopt. But whenever you're dealing with such a variety of departments, I think that's the challenge we ran into and we're learning from, and we want to grow as an organization together on.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's a key point, particularly for those in organizations with multiple departments. If we look, oftentimes we look at if your team is smaller, but even on the larger end, your team may be small, but you may be part of this web structure with other departments that you are in, you're liaising with or you're speaking with or in lockstep with. Which leads me to ask this one question. Melissa, you hinted at there's a couple of things that you've tried. I would love to hear what have been some creative strategies to build that community. We lost the water cooler break room, checking in on how your weekend went environment, where you do learn a little bit about your team members personally and how they're doing. Perhaps that is a moment as a manager you understand that, oh, perhaps X is happening and they may need one resource or another. So I would love to hear strategies from our panelists of things that have worked, ideas, as well as our audience. As I said, this is interactive and participatory. So I welcome everyone to share one thing that was effective in community building amongst your team working from home. So as that floods into the chat, I emphasize floods. Shameless plug for participation there. I invite our panelists to share some strategies that work with their team. Feel free to jump right in.
We did some virtual events that were optional because that's not for everyone, but we did some virtual happy hours and lunches where it was no work. Just show up and connect with your coworkers, talk about things that are going on in your personal life, and engage with each other in kind of that water cooler talk. And that was pretty popular.
Melissa, I just wrote down virtual happy hour. So when I was in Athens, we have a group that we call Ladies in Leadership, and we did virtual happy hour and virtual meetings, but I never did that with staff, not there and not here. And I wrote it down because it's actually a phenomenal idea to bring people together and to connect. What we have done with the City of Atlanta is small group meetings as well as your typical staff meetings, but not to discuss work, to just kind of decompress. In my department particularly, there's been a lot of loss, both COVID related and not. And we deal with really heavy topics already. And when that loss impacts someone in the department, I paused and we had at least two different virtual experiences and two in-person experiences where we just have to stop, address it, have an opportunity to speak your mind, not so much make peace with it, but acknowledging things like that helps the team move forward. I've found that it can be really detrimental to push forward and ignore things. And because this group of people, the majority of my staff was hired remotely and had not worked with one another in person, 65% of my team. And that's a challenge in itself. So when you have a loss that's impacted everyone, it's important to discuss it. We also have good talks. So I give away gift cards after I confirmed with our ethics department that I can do that. So I do shining star recognitions, and you never know who it's going to be. And it just catches people off guard and they're excited, they celebrate. And in the small group sessions, it's been my managers and supervisors. We've come together encouraging one another so that they can encourage staff. So the basic type things, but I'm pretty sure in the next week or two, we might have a virtual non-alcoholic happy hour. So thanks for that
Thank you.
idea.
Josh?
Recently, we've been, we weren't able to have the employee appreciation kind of day that we usually have out at a park. And so we've been trying to, have kind of drive-through events for employees, to hand off food by department and just to say thank you. So in the manager's office, we've been trying to make as many of those as possible. I think the interesting thing with that is many of us have worked with each other all year, but haven't seen as much of people in person. It's been an interesting transition to like re-engage in person with a lot of employees that, we know are doing amazing work out in the field. We would have typically seen a lot more. And so that is one way to kind of begin to, I would say, almost reintroduce ourselves as leaders to the organization and try to do it in a way of saying thanks. So we've been trying to do a number of things like that. I think one thing I found that worked really well because of WebEx fatigue has been actually just calling folks and like just asking them how they're doing. I know I had a number of people just say, that was always kind of odd and different and not something we did before, right? So it was all very in-person meetings and kind of get to business, but wanting to make sure that like I'm calling people without an agenda. So that's something that I've tried really hard to do. Kind of speaking to the like lack of connection, we've tried to do things that bring people into cross-departmental work and identify cross-departmental teams to work on things as a way to build that connection and kind of set ourselves up on a ramp for when people come back to really start to do some of the cross-departmental initiatives we've been ramping up for. So trying to get people to engage across departments in a way that they haven't this past year, because that's been one of the biggest things that we've missed is we've all been focused on COVID response, staying safe, and we put a lot of things on the side, kind of the side burner. So how do we begin to start to think about these things that we were really working hard on before we shifted focus? And so trying to do that in a way where people feel re-engaged and re-inspired and ready to kind of tackle new things.
Yeah, Pooja, Mary mentioned something about engaging the people who are, Mary in the chat mentioned something about engaging the people who aren't usually, jumping and eager to engage with other colleagues. But it reminded me of a step that I took early on when I first got with the city, which kind of like is what Coralyn mentioned, the one-on-ones. So group engagement is important and trying to pull everyone together, but you do have people who are uncomfortable. They were introverted when we were in person. So virtual for them is the perfect opportunity not to engage. But just one-on-ones, touching base to make sure, one, that you feel connected, two, that you're being productive, but also thirdly, that you are not forgotten and that you still know you're part of the team and valued and needed. That's important work-wise, but it's also important when we think about what each of us probably experienced personally that you don't bring to work, that you bring to work, but you don't, carry and wear on your sleeves. And my one-on-one interactions really proved helpful, not just to staff, but also to me. It's a reminder that you got to remember we're all human beings and trying to handle this pandemic as best as we can.
Thank you. I think we just got a response from Mary that she scheduled one-on-one sessions with her staff for this exact reason. So I think that's something that I'll come in and share from the Davenport perspective, what we did, and perhaps this could be helpful to our participants. So I joined the Davenport team on March 9th, 2020. So if we all remember that week, it started out normal. And on Friday of that week is when everything happened with the run in the grocery stores, working from home transition. One thing that we did, which I think reflects on all of your answers, is this intentional effort from the part of team leaders and team members to ensure that team members are okay it was a lot to take in psychologically, whether it be dramatic changes to childcare, or children's schooling, to basics on one-bedroom apartment, two people working from home, who's going where. One thing that I appreciated from the Davenport Institute was this instruction from our team leader to take 30 minutes every day or 30 minutes throughout the week, however you want to split it. Was this flexibility there, whether it's in your lunch hour, to call home, call your parents, call your family, call someone you haven't spoken to, in an effort to stay connected outside of your team. So whether that's you add an extra 15 minutes to your lunch break, or it's a Friday afternoon, you take 30 minutes, you have this flex 30 minutes throughout the week to do that. Another thing we did was we put in walking meetings. This is back before anything was open. So every Friday was a social check-in on the team where we all went for a walk. We were on our phones, not in front of a camera, outside. Perhaps we were a little spoiled. We're in Southern California, so we were able to be outside, just to talk about how the week has been, how our family's doing. Last, I'll suggest as a strategy, we started a book club on a book that has nothing to do with what we do professionally, but just a book that one of us wanted to read, and then we would talk about it during our walking meetings. And it was just something that was very relaxed, not on a time schedule, but a way to bring the team together in a way that perhaps we wouldn't have prior. So just a couple of strategies to throw out there: walking meetings, check-ins, encouraging communication with team members, families, and if you have readers in your team, we're still doing our book club. So I want to throw that out there. Looking back to, oh, wait, I see a couple of thoughts. Walking phone meetings are a great pandemic solution for connection and wellness. Yes, Melissa. So, and then Erin said that we try to maintain incidental social discussions and group online chats in the first few minutes of meetings, encouraging pet and child cameos in most virtual meetings. I really like that. Healthy activity competition. Much appreciated. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I found us doing that as well, where often, in meetings before COVID, we would just jump right in and get to business. We all had places to go when we were driving one place and having to go to another. I wonder if people think that will be something that stays post-COVID. If will we go back to meetings as normal, or will we learn from this? How do we keep that going? How do we keep that pre-meeting conversation kind of a part of things?
And Josh, I like a good pre-meeting conversation, but timed. So I think it's important to take a lot of the lessons we're learning and have learned and carry them forward. And I think that's when connecting with people is important. So that's definitely one of the things we'll keep. But as I said earlier, we're hybrid, so we're going to keep a lot of our remote changes that we've implemented while returning to some more traditional ways. And even those ways won't be the same because we're still going to be socially distanced. We still have to consider everything that people have going on at home and their concerns. So I don't know that we'll ever go back to how it was, but those get to know you few minutes in the beginning and just make people feel heard, I know we'll keep it.
Mm-hmm. Deborah, if I may ask a follow-up to you and to the panel at large, how do you think the past year, with everyone being remote, has changed the future of the way we work, particularly in local government? You mentioned with your team, you're going to do this hybrid, as you said, model. Do you think that's what we're moving towards beyond? I mean, just beyond your department? And
I think it is.
Melissa and Josh as well.
I think it is. I think the one thing we all know is consistent is change. And, you open the panel by asking how we shifted and prepared early on. And those things that we've learned, we don't get to divorce them and say, okay, well, now we're going back to how it was. There are some things that we shifted to that have streamlined our processes better, that have made us better, more efficient, more effective, and we're going to keep that. And I think that it's important to continue growing. I know the city of Atlanta is contemplating what to do with some of its assets, some of these buildings that maybe we can put back on the tax roll or other things. I think even Athens may have been contemplating how to keep the good changes that we've evolved into and the things that we've learned, and how to continue building on it. And I just can't imagine or envision that we all go back to how it used to be. Even in some other aspects of life outside of local government, we've learned that having virtual access or remote access is really beneficial, both financially and with the flexibility to let staff work in different places. Some people are a lot more productive not being in the office. So, yep, to answer your question, Pooja, I believe we're moving forward with this and other changes.
Thank you. Melissa, Josh, any thoughts?
We certainly are. We've rolled out a remote work policy for our employees. They can work with their manager to customize what makes sense for them in their role, whether that's hybrid or fully remote or in person, as we have some folks that just prefer that. I think what we most learned through this pandemic is that if you show up for your employees, they're going to show up for you. And so as leaders, how can we meet them where they are? How can we engage with them with what they need in their personal lives? And how can we continue to do that in the future? We have situations where we have built long-lasting relationships with our employees by providing what they needed during this last year, that we will continue to do and reap the benefit of that loyalty. That's such a two-way street from employer to employee and teams to managers. And we want to continue to do that, to be a high-performing employer, a high-performing workplace. So I do think that that change continues in local government. We need to innovate, we need to evolve. Sometimes there's been inertia around what can government do remote, what can we do work from home, we're an in-person service. We've proven we can do it and we can do it effectively. So now we need to continue to do that and provide those services to our residents and to our employees to be the best employers we can be.
Yeah, and I think when you think about it in terms of, our workforce and the opportunities our workforce has to work other places, how hard it is to fill positions, recruit, retain. I think the flexibility and the options that working from home has brought forward for employees to meet them where they are, I think has been a huge success. I think people bring their whole selves to work, and it changes things if you've got to cover for someone with a doctor's appointment, and you don't have to come in for the first 2 hours of work because you can work from home. And that should be something that employees expect and don't feel bad about. And I think if we don't keep up, we're going to continue to lose that recruitment and brain drain game, and we can't afford to, and we just can't sit in the sidelines. I think what we found is we want to also think about flexibility in roles that can't work from home. So I think that's the challenge that's facing us as well. Is we've clearly heard from employees who run routes or are on crews that there's opportunities that they want to be considered for flexibility. We need to consider 4-day work weeks. We need to look at things that we've held back for whatever reason in other avenues. So I think we're challenging ourselves to contemplate what flexibility looks like for every employee, and if that's possible. But I think working from home is proven to work. We've got the technology now to do it, and we're integrating new systems that are all cloud-based that make it even easier. And so that digital push and customer service on the digital networks is something that we were a little behind on, but now as we catch up, a lot more seems possible.
Thank you. One thing I thought of when Deborah, you were speaking, and also Melissa, is that another space in which this hybrid model would assist is also just commute. I mean, at least in LA, the commute is notoriously difficult and miserable, if I may just add that. I'm sure big cities like Atlanta, you have this challenge with the elimination of the commute. You buy yourself back anywhere from 30, and in LA, 60 to 90 minutes each way. Also environmentally, it reduces carbon footprint. So just a thought that I had.
Yeah, that is a really good point. So I'm sure like LA with Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, there's nothing Metro about living in Metro Atlanta. So I still commute sometimes from Athens to Atlanta, which is an hour, 20 minutes, hour and a half without traffic. And I don't live in Atlanta. I don't live in Metro Atlanta. I used to, I grew up in Atlanta, but I have staff, I have directors and managers who live in Metro Atlanta, and it takes them just as long to get to work as it does I, who don't even live that far away. I see Mary not missing the 90-minute commute. So yeah, the ability to just work from home, like even when Josh said, you've got someone at home, a partner, a spouse who's got a doctor's appointment or something else, and you can still be productive. You can still do what you need to do without that guilt that so many of us have. But I definitely don't miss being in the car. In a previous life, I commuted every day, an hour and a half each way. And that is hellish. There's nothing fun about that. And it's actually physically unhealthy. So you're right, that commute makes a difference. But now one bad side to that is I think some people are capitalizing on it and scheduling meetings back to back to back with no time in between because there isn't a commute. So I try not to do that. And to the extent that I have control over my calendar, I build in gaps because that's just not sustainable.
I think that's a great strategy to intentionally put in blocks. You block off your calendar with, you could just say busy and nobody can schedule a meeting in that calendar. So you have that buffer. If not for nothing, then a bio break at least. Melissa, Josh, thoughts there? Okay. So then as we approach the question part of our session from the audience, I do want to ask one thing. Josh, you mentioned recruiting and building your team, growing your team. Now, what would you say to graduating bachelor students, MPP, master's students that are looking for a job in local government on the topic of working from home? We have our graduation on Friday. So I know our students would love to hear this. What should they be prepared for in this hybrid model? I'm going to use that.
I think there's such a wide gap of where local governments are across the country. I think that as a graduate, you might find more consistency in the private sector, and the expectations you have as you approach job opportunities might be that there will be telecommuting opportunities. I think oftentimes in local government that's just not necessarily the case. I think my advice would be, there's nothing wrong with asking the question in the interview process and asking if there's a policy. I would start with asking if there's a policy, and then if there's not, I would just ask whoever the supervisor would be, what are their thoughts, and do they have the ability to offer telecommuting based on the position. I think learning the organization and being a voice for why, in local government, you might need to be a voice for why this is a good idea, and own that earlier in your career than you would have to somewhere else. And so I think there needs to be champions in local government for telecommuting, and people who can point to how it's a good thing and helps them do their jobs, and how it's a win for the organization. So I think for me, and thinking about what I would do differently, we didn't think about this as change management when we rolled out working from home. So we didn't put a lot of effort into communicating to all employees why we were doing it. And I think that was one of our biggest mistakes, is we didn't ever explain to a public works crew why HR was all of a sudden working from home, why it was working great for IT because they have a tiny building and couldn't be safe. And so we lost that opportunity to explain it. And so I think these two things are interconnected in terms of a new graduate coming in with experience and understanding how, with all these tools, you can work from wherever, can be a voice to help encourage that change and that culture change to continue to happen.
Thank you. Other thoughts from our panel?
I might say one of the things that I've noticed, and Deborah commented on this, and Pooja, you did too a little bit, that in remote work, we can tend to overbook, we can tend to over Zoom ourselves, and it's easy to extend your workday. You know, you don't have that commute. Book that commute time in for your wellness, for your family time, for whatever that may be, and don't just fill it with work. And I think for new graduates, that's a bit of a balance, because as you're going into your first job or even transitioning to a new job or a promotion, you want to be that high performer that's knocking it out of the park and doing that A+ work at every turn. But also remember that if we had one takeaway from this COVID, your wellness, your well-being, and your mental health and physical health are paramount. And so make sure while you're focused on your work and you're doing your exceptional job there, that you're carving out time for all of those things as well. And in leadership positions, helping your team to do the same. When we're our best selves personally, we're our best employees and we're our best teams. And so I really would say that that's the challenge in a remote work and hybrid work environment that we need to navigate and focus on as we move forward.
I'm going to jump in and say, I think that's an excellent idea to put in your commute. So like in your calendars, if you would have driven from 7:30 to 9, which Mary, I saw your chat, which was, hey, I was in that boat. Block that in, don't book meetings before 9. And that would have been your time, I don't know, to hear an audiobook or make some phone calls with family. So I really like that idea, but sorry to steal your thunder there, Deborah.
No, I was just going to say, Pooja, so the other thing about working remotely, of course, is the little bit of flexibility it does give you. So for example, I'm going to transition from my computer to my phone so I can go pick up my kid, but I've got something in the car so that I'm not a distracted driver. And I just wanted to say that because I'll be as discreet as I can, but I'm still with us.
Thank you. See, here we go. Working from home, adaptability in action. We did not, to our viewers, we did not intentionally put this in. This is, it's like that little tagline that this is not a paid endorsement. Thank you so much. We talked a little bit, Melissa, Josh, and Deborah, you mentioned key lessons, takeaways on the topic of remote work. So this is one of those questions I open it up to our audience as well. Please share one key takeaway you had as our panel shares, one or two takeaways before we open it into questions. So I look forward to hearing in the chat. Melissa, Josh, would you like to go
Yeah,
first?
I would say, just this might be a little too philosophical, but I would say that oftentimes in local government, with so many departments, we struggle with being siloed based on our departmental work. And I think as employees were able to work from home and be virtual, we found more opportunities to break those silos for those employees. I think early on in COVID, we had a lot more employees working on assignments that were clearly outside of their departmental workload, as it was focused on COVID response. And employees were able to be adaptable and flexible, and being at home helped with that. And they were working on assignments that were nowhere near what their job description was. And I think what we learned was sometimes the actual physical buildings limit, what somebody's potential might be in terms of working on other assignments. And I think as you get outside of a building, you get outside of a structure, and you get outside of your office, it's a lot easier to dream about working on other things and try to re-engage and look for new opportunities to give back to that same goal. And so I think the more we adopt working from home, the more we adopt that flexibility of employees to work on projects outside of their scope, I think the better off we are as organizations.
To build a bit off of what Josh said, I think that is something we saw in emergency operations, where you're bringing in people and putting them in different seats and really innovating. And I would say that the key lesson and takeaway we should really remember as government leaders and public servants is that rapid paced change can successfully happen in government. We innovated this year quickly in ways that we probably didn't think was possible to do in such short amount of time, while providing exceptional and incredible service to our communities during this last year. And we should be really proud of that, but remember that we can do it and continue to think about innovation and change at a bit of a faster pace in certain applications.
Thank you, Melissa. And Deborah, you're safely transitioned to your phone. Any key lesson takeaway you want to add as a pop-up?
Key lesson takeaway, and I hope you can hear me well. I think it's probably a combination of what Josh and Melissa have shared, and that is that there are endless opportunities here, and we can continue growing and working in the right direction and really not limit ourselves, because I think there's so much more to be gained from where we are, and not consider it a loss. Like, we've learned so much in this year, and there's still so much to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I am going to share our key, I would say my personal key lesson takeaway, and then open it to questions. I think this intentional awareness of wellness, which, Melissa, you spoke to as new graduates come in, of taking time to, you want to be that rock star, A+ employee team member, and just taking time for self-care. I am one of those people that ends up booking back-to-back Zoom meetings, and that will email past 5 p.m. and this intentional, okay, this is where I would have commuted. This is my time to take a mental break, because your brain does get tired too. And taking that intentional step to pause, go outside during lunch, see the world as a very important takeaway. I am going to open it to questions. If there are questions in our audience, in our chat, and if you don't mind, Corlin, could you unmute yourself and share what you put in as a lesson that you had? No, we can't hear you. Corlin, I don't have your audio.
Oh, here we go. You hear me now?
Yes.
There were so many lessons from the shelter in place, and one, it really provided the opportunity to step back and realize how much not only myself but the team was drinking from the fire hose, and it gave some clarity of priorities. And then also, as a team leader, I feel more productive at home, because you have less interruptions of the drop-in kind of water cooler talk or other people's emergencies becoming your emergencies. And then my own personal growth was around creating boundaries, realizing that my boundaries needed some improvement, and then also self-awareness around my own work-life balance. And a few important takeaways in regarding team was my awareness is when you're drinking from the fire hose, I wasn't taking enough time to be engaged with the team, and taking those shared moments that I had the opportunity in the one-to-one meetings to remember, okay, we're human. Like, it's not always about the task, what's going on with you, and to be able to connect with people. And I'm so optimistic about what's ahead, because companies and organizations that weren't open to remote work or hybrid work are now looking at it a little differently. And so I'm excited about what's ahead.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I agree with you. It's hard to create those boundaries. And I think that's something we can all take away from the last year. I invite other members of our audience, if you have a takeaway that you would like to share or a question for our panel, please feel free to unmute yourself or drop it into the chat. While people are thinking, because I am not above this, Erin, would you mind sharing the healthy activity competition that you had? Because I am now very curious. So if you don't mind, no pressure to be on camera. If you could unmute, did Erin drop off? Oh, dang, Erin, Erin dropped off. I'm very curious about that healthy activity competition. Okay. I'm gonna look through the chat.
Well, I'll add really quickly that this year has taught me that while you can't have everything, sometimes it's not wise to strive to have every single thing. You can't really get a lot of out of balance, and so you can get the best of both worlds. For example, I really was excited to participate in this, and when my babysitter said she couldn't pick up my child, in a pre-world, that would have meant that I probably would have said, I'm so sorry, but I'm not going to be able to do this. But here, it's the best of both worlds. I get to participate, and I still get to be mommy and not leave my kid here past pickup time.
I
So
really
that's a good
appreciate
thing
that.
that come out of this.
I think I think that's a very good takeaway from this, is that you get to you also eliminate whatever this being in person or us coming in. I can say this with a lot of our programming at the Davenport Institute. We've been able to engage with local government leaders across the country, and in many ways across the world. We've had people internationally be able to come in and participate in a certificate program without coming in to Southern California. So much appreciated. Oh, note from Maureen, loving what Deborah just shared. Thank you. So I'm going to give it another minute.
I think one thing, personally that I've learned is with kids and being busy with kind of activities outside of work with our kids. I think a lot of those things went away this year, and so we had a lot more family time, and that wasn't structured. And so I think with my family, I've been very careful to think about together as a family, like, what do we add back, and why are we doing certain things? And I think I want to make sure I take that same approach to kind of what do I add back in terms of how I did things at work, and be very cognizant of things that I can take away that might encourage that balance to remain, because I do think that extra time with family and the like unstructured time was really refreshing, and what helped me get through COVID. And so I don't want to lose that. And so quickly, you can kind of find stuff to do. And I just want to make sure that I intentionally don't rush to make that decision.
I really like that. Thank you, Josh. I think intentionality and awareness are some key words that we can take away from this conversation. I am going to, as we're approaching the hour, again, intentionally being aware of time, I do want to respect everyone's time as they've come in. Kirsten, where are you on my screen? There you are. Kirsten, if you have any closing out ELGL notes to share, I will say this, that it's been a pleasure to be here with this panel and with this audience group. Thank you so much for your engagement. I will pass the mic to Kirsten if she has any wrap-up notes. Oh, they're coming into the chat. ELGL pop-ups.
Yes,
I'm going to drop in our Davenport link if you want to learn more about the Davenport Institute, want to chat engagement. We're happy to be here. So I'll drop that in while Kirsten takes it away.
thank you. And I just dropped in the chat. We are doing a short half-day regional local government conference next Friday on May 21st. And Melissa and Josh have both been part of our planning committee. The agendas really have shaped out to be a recognition of the essential employees who work in local government. And then also just some helpful tips and reflections from the past year of managing during a pandemic. So I encourage you to take a look and register for that event. And again, this is part of an ongoing series that ELGL is proud to host with Davenport Institute. And next week, we will have another session on Tuesday at 11 o'clock Pacific. And we'll be hearing from leaders in Beaverton, Oregon and Kansas City, Missouri about their experiences managing communities, again, over the course of a very long year during a global pandemic. So we hope you'll tune in for that. And again, the recording from today's session will be available on elgl.org later today. And we also will email you a copy so you have it handy. So on behalf of ELGL, thank you to Deborah, Melissa, and Josh for joining us. And a huge thanks to our friends at the Davenport Institute for all of their great work as well.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.